All right, if you like fishing reports for Lake Mead and Lake Mojave, then make sure you subscribe to In Season Nevada. In this video, we're going to be talking about the spawning of a wide variety of species, and I'll go over that list right now. Gizzard shad, threadfin shad, largemouth and smallmouth bass, striped bass. We're also going to go over crappie and bluegill, catfish, and carp. So if I did not mention a fish that you are interested in hearing about their spawning activity on that list, then this isn't the video for you. All right. Next thing that we're going to go over is where and when to catch each particular kind of fish. We're also going to be going over the best times of year, the best thing that you could be doing this time of year to fill your cooler the most efficient way possible. In case you don't know, we do come from a conservation mindset on this channel, meaning that I'm always orienting my activity not only to fill my cooler this season, but also to keep my cooler full next year and the year after that and the year after that, being a good steward of the resource in each season of life. And then the last thing we're going to go over is the closed areas and the launch reports at certain areas. So I will give you a brief launch report at the very end of this video. All right, let's go ahead and get started with spawning activity, starting with the forage fish, with the gizzard shad and threadfin shad. Gizzard shad primarily spawn early in the morning near the surface of the water. You can find them in open water all the way into very shallow coves. So they will be at the edge of the coves all the way in deep into the shallowest part of the cove. You can actually catch gizzard shad with a line and with a hook, with a very teeny tiny little hook and a small piece of worm or a small piece of bait. That should intrigue the gizzard shad. Threadfin shad are going to be very difficult to catch this time of year. They're typically going to be spawning in deep, slow-moving water. So it's really hard to throw a cast net for gizzard shad in the early parts of the spawn. So consider understanding where they are, because that's going to help you find the striped bass, because striped bass are going to spawn near those gizzard shad, their primary feed source this time of year. All right, next we're going to get into crappie and bluegill. They're already spawned out. So it's actually a great time to fish for crappie and bluegill because all those fish have already done their hard work. They have already recruited the next generation of bluegill and the next generation of crappie that are going to be caught next year and spawning next year. So it's a great opportunity to fish for those species. Also, these species directly compete against largemouth bass and smallmouth bass. So one of the ways that you can fish for crappie and bluegill is to identify a bass bed. Once you find where a bass bed is, you can use a wide variety of fishing techniques to fish for bluegill and crappie in order to get them into your boat. You can use very small white grubs if you like using lures. You can use teeny tiny little minnows if you can source them. As long as they will fit in the fish's mouth, those fish will pretty much eat them. You can use very small little pieces of worm or mealworms to catch all of these species of fish. I've even caught bluegill on very tiny little cuts of bacon. So bluegill will eat just about anything it seems that I'll throw at them, as long as it can fit in their mouth. All right, next we're going to go over largemouth and smallmouth bass. Now, we already talked about bluegill and crappie being direct competitors for largemouth and smallmouth bass. And so if you want to find bass beds this time of year, a great technique is actually use a lure that is the size of a bluegill or a lure that is the size of a crappie that kind of looks like them, and try to locate bass beds. In Lake Mojave, it's going to be a lot easier because you can just visually see where the bass beds are, because they're going to be in shallow water, anywhere from 8 to 12 feet of water. But in Lake Mead, you're going to find that the beds range in depth. Some fish will create beds in shallow water, while other beds are going to be deep as 20 to 25 feet, which might be just deep enough where you can't see the structure of the bed to identify it visually. So using a crappie or a bluegill imitation lure can help you find bass beds and catch some really big bass. Whether or not you keep them, hey, it's legal. I don't judge, but consider that that fish is working really hard for you to recruit some fish that you could catch next year. And so let that fish go possibly and catch it in a month and catch some of the bluegill and the crappie that are going to be antagonizing that fish's nest over the next month. All right, let's get into catfish. Catfish are going to be spawning near the surface of the water at night in shallow areas, 10 feet or less. They're also going to be feeding on the bottom when they're spawning, and then in the daytime, they will go deeper and they will try to find other food sources. If they can find threadfin shad, they will eat them. And so if you want to preserve the threadfin shad population, it's a good idea to catch some catfish in the middle of the day really deep, because they're going to be directly going after that food source that so many other fish depend on. And catfish are considered a underutilized resource, which means you can pretty much catch as many catfish as you want and it will have very little impact on the population. Just make sure you are respecting all the limits and regulations when you do that. Okay, going into striped bass. Striped bass are going to be spawning near where you can find threadfin shad. So again, think Las Vegas Wash, Temple Bar, where the river inlets into Lake Mead, and the Muddy River in the Overton Arm, in areas where you have access to deep water. Striped bass primarily feed in the evening, right around sunset, but they'll also feed around sunrise as well. But remember, they are busy spawning right now. They're going to stay deep wherever they can find threadfin shad. That's going to be their most convenient food source right now. That's why it's critical that we catch fish like catfish this time of year that are a competing species for striped bass during this brief window of time. Again, I'm not anti-catfish. I love eating catfish. I love catching catfish, right? So it does not bother me that there are catfish in the lake. All I'm saying is if you are fishing for striped bass during this time of year, you're not necessarily getting the best recruitment that you can. But striper are also a fairly abundant fish in the lake, so I'm not really that worried if you're catching and eating striper this time of year. Something to consider is that some of the stripers will be starving this time of year. They do get a disease that makes them very, very skinny. So if you catch a really skinny striper, consider throwing him back, hoping that maybe he gets better, overcomes his illness, and is able to be a catchable fish later on in the year. But in general, striped bass are not at their best eating in the late spring. They become in their best eating, in my opinion, somewhere around July, all the way down to the end of the year in November. That's your best eating window for striper. A lot of people complain that striper don't taste good, but consider possibly holding off on catching them until their best time of the year for eating. Next, we're going to talk about carp. Carp is kind of a random one on this list. However, carp do spawn at the surface of the water in open water in the middle of the day. And so if you like to bow fish, always make sure you check the regulations, because regulations can change at any point in time. However, at the time of recording this video, I do believe that Lake Mead still allows bow fishing for carp. But if not, I know that fly fishing is completely legal. And so consider using flies for catching carp this time of year if you want to catch them while they're spawning at the surface. Remember, those fish are working really hard. And so they are going to use the least amount of effort in order to feed. And that means that bugs at the surface of the water are going to be prime tickets for them during this time of year. And so if you like fly fishing for carp, consider doing that if you enjoy it. All right. Lastly, we're going to talk about where to best use your time to fill your cooler. I kind of already gave you some hints, but yes, if you like fishing for largemouth and smallmouth bass, consider trying fishing for crappie and bluegill and learning that, because those fish are directly competing against your resource, right? They are directly impacting your next year's fishing experience, right? And so just consider leaving those fish alone for another month, waiting until the end of May, beginning of June to catch those fish, and fishing for crappie and or bluegill. Also, again, if you like fishing for stripers, it's great. Just wait until July when they're going to taste a lot better. And they're going to be a lot more fun to catch, because you're going to see a lot of the spawning is over and they're going to start pushing those threadfin shad to the surface of the water. and do those amazing striper boils that we all love. I want to talk briefly before we end this video about closures at Government Wash and some of the launch conditions. So at this particular time, Echo Canyon, Temple Bar, Willow Beach, Hemingway, Colville are all open to launch. Also Cottonwood Cove as well. And so I have not heard of any launch closures as of recently, which is good news. This means that the lake is stabilizing and we are not in a crisis where we don't know what the water level is going to be next month. So we have some stability, which is improving launch conditions. But launches are getting crowded. So if you are out there launching, make sure you understand the correct warm up and wipe down lanes. So when I say warm up, I mean your ready lane, right? And your wipe down lane. A lot of people do block the traffic at Hemingway Marina, okay? And consider this, if you have multiple people in your crew, consider having somebody who is on your truck driving the vehicle and somebody on the boat driving the boat, okay? If only 2 people at a time are using the docks, right? And there's 20 people in line, that line's gonna go so much slower if you're not able to be efficient. So save the docks for people who are launching or unloading or unloading their boats alone. All right. Next thing to go over is closures at Government Wash. I hate seeing closures on roads, but they do exist for a reason. The reason is because of excessive littering, road damage, and illegal camping. Now, I understand public lands. I want to be able to camp as long as I want to on public lands. However, there is a 14-day restriction. And so I would encourage you to follow that 14-day restriction. It's not stopping you from fishing, right? But it does stop me from going out there with my family overnight on a quick drive because now I have less access to the lake. So consider not breaking the rules for other people. Another thing to consider is excessive littering. When you litter, it alerts people like me where your fishing spot is. If I find beer cans, cigarette butts, and leftover fishing tackle on the shoreline, I'm going to assume that it's a good spot to fish, and then I'm going to catch all the fish there, right? And then other people are going to catch all the fish there because they're going to also notice your spot as well. And then eventually that spot's going to get pressured and the fish are going to stop going there. And we will have to find a new spot to fish, right? And you will have to find a new spot to fish because everybody's been hitting your spot. So if you want to catch more fish, consider being stealthy about your fishing. Now, I always end my videos with asking for comments. Again, July is probably one of the best times of year to fish. Pretty much every species of fish are feeding at their peak feeding because we are in post-spawn on every species of fish when it comes into June and July. What lures, techniques, or other questions do you have about catching fish in the post-spawn in Lake Mead and Lake Mojave? Interested in answering those questions? I don't give out specific GPS coordinates about where I fish, but I will tell you general locations in which you can find fish. So again, ask those questions in the comments below. Be respectful, and I'll see you guys next time.